and welcome to this MDO Director's Office Roundtable 2020. For those who are regular guests at our annual roundtable, and I believe this is may well be the 11th or 13th or maybe even 14th time that we organize this. This is the first time that we're doing it by via electronic means, which is a bit of a challenge for us. Probably not for yourselves at the other end of the camera, but again, we'll try to make the best of it. During our previous panels, the live sessions, if you want, we always try to be as interactive as possible and get questions and a bit of a discussion. Obviously, that is not possible in this case. So just from a housekeeping perspective, there's an option for you to ask questions through what is called a chat function on your screen, and we'll be picking those questions up as they come along, or maybe defer them to the end of the session, which should last about an hour, respecting obviously your time. Another housekeeping point just to mention, the session will be recorded. And that the recording of this session will then be posted on the MDO website for those who either would want to relook, which would be nice, or want to share that with colleagues, other people who might be interested in the topic. So you'll find that on our website in the next couple of days, whatever technology is required to do that, but MDO will take care of that. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our two other panelists. Jane Wilkinson, very happy to have Jane on board. Jane is a long-standing expert in the field of ESG, and even before the time it was called ESG. Jane has worked for KPMG, where she was a very active not just partner, but participant in the different reports that relate to the topic as well, and has since set herself up as an independent director, where she obviously shares her expertise and knowledge in the different boards that she sits, but also in the form of, let's call it consultant, or with her own business, and again, providing advice on the topic of ESG. Very happy to have you with us, Jane, and thanks for joining. We also have Fabio Giuliani, who is a team leader at MDO, the management company. He is an expert in risk management. Being a partner at Director's Office, I can tell you that we often visit our colleagues at the risk team, because obviously it's one of those topics that is ever evolving and always interesting to discuss. And Fabio is one of those people who brings a wealth of experience in the field of risk management. And we thought that angle might also be interesting in our topic today. Again, with a view towards this webinar, you may have seen in the invite Corinne Molitor, who was also going to join us as a panelist. Unfortunately, Corinne fell ill, very sorry. Nothing corona related, by the way, but nonetheless, we wish her obviously well and look forward to her speedy recovery. That is kind of the introduction that I'd like to do. The agenda, try to be a little bit flexible, but this is, I think, what we are hoping to cover. A bit of an introduction, ESG, niche or necessity or mandatory. We'll get to that. Bit of a history. So the session is kind of conceptually in what it means and get the same kind of understanding, but also hopefully a little bit more also practical. And Jane will spend some time on the EU disclosure regulation, which is very topical because that was published only, I think, last week. And as said, a few comments with regards or thoughts with regards to risk management, compliance, challenges, etc. Now, you may or may not have participated, but you've certainly seen a wealth of webinars, publications on the topic of ESG. And ESG is not necessarily something new. Back in the day, and I recall one of my clients, a bank and asset manager called Triodos in Holland back in the early 80s. In the day, they were considered green, but certainly had a strong social, environmental impact feature in the service offering. So I think what we've seen over time, we'll look into that a bit more, may have started as a niche ESG, impact, sustainability, but it's certainly become, I would say, mainstream. And again, best evidence is the fact that we see so many publications and people interested in the topic. Interested certainly, but of course, with the question, where are we going? What is required? What do we need to do? What does it mean? And already we've seen that a lot of companies report on ESG performance, but that is their own reporting system. So as a consumer, quite difficult to compare one and the other. The term greenwashing has been used frequently because green sells, sustainability sells, ESG sells. So if you put that on your prospectus, then it might appeal to certain people. But again, the consumer at this stage is still difficult to let's say, compare the different reports. I suspect that technology will be a friend in terms of streamlining the reporting, streamlining the information, and certainly the data providers will probably use technology and hopefully combine into one sort of model that the market can use. In particular, again, on the ESG front, it's become, certainly to me, most people, it's become very apparent that this is not any longer a purely shareholder-related issue. We are more and more recognizing that the stakeholder, i.e., in our perspective, not just the managers, but also the clients, the investors, in relation to the investee companies, their clients, their producers, all the different parties, and last but not least, the consumer, play an active role here. And I think the momentum has reached that everybody is towing the same line, and that is helping the momentum, where then obviously the regulator comes in and starts to streamline, and we may have views on that, whether it's not enough, too late, too little, too much, and we'll discuss on that as well. So that's a lot that is happening, and we suspect, hope, I guess, that in the end, if there is such a thing as an end, because possibly this is a continuously evolving issue, it'll become mainstream. Reporting on ESG will be streamlined. It will be comparable. Consumers will be able to make their choices. Investors will be able to compare companies in terms of their impact. They will be able to report clearly to the stakeholders. In short, ESG will be owned by anyone who has an impact on any of the E, S, or G considerations. As we said, it's ESG, as we call it now, is not new, and fair dues to the Quakers, not just our friends from the oats production, but more from their philosophy. Already back in the late 1800s, adopted no alcohol, no weapons, etc. Investment policy. We have seen that over time, certainly, let's say the Vietnam War, the 60s, turbulent period, obviously caused a lot of people to think about the social part of things. Around the world, so not just the US, but we've seen in Norway also a strong sense of doing the right thing, having impact through its investments. So again, that started, you see slowly the momentum starting. And maybe one of the notable changes that started things moving in a more managed fashion was the UNPRI, the UN principles that was adopted, I think, 2006. And you know, we've seen that that being adopted by a lot of players. And again, this is not a bad thing. Investors, investees, they like seeing that their funds, their companies subscribe to the UN principles, and it sells, and that's not a bad thing because it helps to make change. So here's a slightly more zoomed in over the last couple of years, things that have happened. Jane, any particular, let's say, elements that you'd like to pull out?
Maybe I would say 2015 was quite an important year, because 2015 was the year that we had the Paris Agreement, and it was also the year, actually we don't see them on this slide, but the year of the Sustainable Development Goals, the year that all countries signed up to the SDGs. Yeah, no, we do see them in the same box as the Paris Agreement. So 2015 was kind of quite a moment for progress and on the sustainable agenda, and then it kind of triggered as well the EU putting their foot down on the accelerator to come up with the whole raft of new considerations, new action plans, and new regulations that fit into that.
Yeah, and I think this slide is very clear in all the different changes that we see, and in addition to all these initiatives that are being taken, and granted, this is some of the critique that we hear. It is an awful lot to digest, and there's a lot coming to us. There's also differences in terms of definitions, in terms of let's say approach, and perhaps in that sense the taxonomy, if nothing else, is a great effort to try to get people aligned, and the reporting requirements hopefully will also provide let's say a bit more clarity. This chart, I think, speaks for itself in the sense that the investments, the money that has flown into ESG has increased dramatically, and it's at a relatively large number. Having said that, this in itself may only, if we look back 5 or 10 years from now, may just be peanuts compared to what we have then and there. Again, because all these initiatives will lead to more segregation, ESG, non-ESG, and perhaps as a result, we'll see this number increase dramatically. But it's comforting to see that a lot of money is flowing into the sector, and as such is doing its part in terms of not just environmental side, but social and governance related as well. Although again, those are probably two of the less measurable elements of ESG, but we may come to that later on as well. Yeah, in terms of not just money flowing in and booming, the regulations, let's say participation of the regulators drafting laws, directives, regulations, circulars, etc., has increased again quite dramatically as well. do you see this trend continuing, Jen?
To a certain extent, yes. I mean, in Europe, we are slightly more advanced. So this chart is, it's from the United Nations Principles of Responsible Investing. And in Europe, we are a little bit ahead of the curve. So the 80 revised policy instruments that came basically between 2018 and 2020, a large proportion of that is at the European level. So we have a whole load of, like I said before, a whole load of different initiatives that are all kind of linked together. So you don't just have Sustainable Finance Action Plan, there's action plans related to biodiversity action plan with objectives to meet by 2030, and there's a whole load of different rafts of things that all fit into that, and of course there's lots of focus on incentivization as well of certain green investments. So yeah, I think that in Europe we will see a little bit more, but a lot of the foundations are already being laid in Europe. So, okay, we'll see changes, tweaks around about the place, like we've seen there, that there is embedding, well, we'll talk about that in a while, but there's embedding of sustainability risks into AIFMD and UCITS and MiFID just now. But once that's in, then it's there, and then we'll just have to adapt to it. And okay, I mean, we know that Europe, the European Union, at least they do fitness checks and reviews to see whether implementation has gone how they thought it would, whether it needs to be changed, but that will be in a couple of years' time, 2, 3, 4 years' time. So, but yeah, I think in Europe we're already quite well advanced, to be honest.
Fabio, a quick question, if I may, just in between. I know you're part of the working group at MDO. How do you experience this increase in regulation? Because obviously, from a risk management perspective, there are more regulations that touch on the risk management side. Is the industry coping with all this avalanche, as is often referred to, of regulation?
Hi, Gary. Hi, everyone. Well, yeah, we have seen, of course, first of all, as the slides are showing, an increased interest from clients, first of all. We are seeing clients launching either fully ESG structure or integrating ESG component into the prospectuses, okay? Coming also from investors, which are more and more concerned about sustainable impact in the industry. And yes, we in terms of risk management, we see, of course, the regulation moving on that direction, trying to create a standard, trying to create harmonized ESG ratings. And we believe that as soon as the EU taxonomy will be, of course, live, enter into force, and standard established, we will need to cope with those. So in terms of in the UCITS world, but of course in the IFMD also world, because we know that the ESG regulation will have an impact across all the existing regulation. So yeah, we see this trend coming very fast.
Thanks, and good luck to you in digesting all that information. We'll come back to the challenges that you're obviously facing from a risk management perspective later. I think one of the things that we've seen, obviously, when we started talking about ESG and probably SRI before that, was the need to have a definition. The European Commission in its action plan has actually set out a definition. I think the next slide will look into that a bit more. But for me, I think the understanding that it is the integration of environmental, social, and governance factors into the investment process and the decision-making that follows is probably the most most descriptive definition, I would say. The recently published disclosure regulation, I think it was Article 8, if I'm not mistaken, describes also a bit better what the definition is in true EU form. That is not just a one-liner, that is a whole paragraph, of course, but there you go. The action plan, in fact, is an interesting one, and it's come about after several consultations with the industry. I know ALFI has been a very active and vocal participant in the consultations. On times they have consulted, reflected with other bodies such as ECODA, etc., other bodies that are directly or indirectly related and affected. They have provided a lot of feedback and input. Probably best to summarize that ALFI, as it has done in previous consultations, one of the things the body is concerned about is, if you like, over-regulation. So anywhere where there is too much pressure and emphasis on the industry to act according to certain rules, while necessary on certain elements, not necessarily needed on others, some freedom should be left with the participants. I think that has been the general, let's say, attitude of ALFI. But it's good to know, I think, as a Luxembourg industry, that ALFI has been a very vocal and active participant. Bringing it slightly closer to home from an asset manager's perspective, but obviously the related parties that we may also have in our audience, such as service providers, management companies, etc. The impact is on a wide scale, and they apply certainly to the managers, but also to the funds. So any fund that has an ESG label, i.e. funds that promote environmental, social characteristics, but also funds that have a sustainability label, they're affected. And then, of course, we see, funds specializing purely on the environmental side, mostly on the environmental side of things, i.e. reducing carbon emission, etc. They're also affected. So it's a relatively wide group of funds that will fall under those regulations. Just briefly, in terms of asset managers, what they need to, as a start, to work on is make certain disclosures on the websites, and that will entail, what their mission is, what they aim to achieve, etc. A general description of what they're doing, ESG related. They also have to disclose that in the prospectus, which obviously makes sense. It's important for our consumers to be able to know. The way I define it usually is people should do what they say and say what they do. This is the start. If you tell people what you do, it's more easy to check that you're actually doing what you're saying. And then finally, on an annual basis, there'll be disclosure in the annual report. That will, if I'm correct, not be just simply in the board of directors part of the financial statements, but a separate and specific disclosure on ESG, the achievements, pitfalls, challenges, etc. That might sound relatively simple, but as we'll see, that actually requires a lot of work, because obviously one of the things that needs to be done before you can put something on your website or later on report in your prospectus and annual report, you need, as an asset manager, to set in place new policies and procedures. You need to clearly define, streamline within your organization, and Jane calls that the gaps, the 4 gaps. She'll talk about that later. So there's a few challenges around there, I would say. I guess, Jane, if I may, with regards to the regulation to the 2019-2088, this kind of describes in a bit of a nutshell. What would you like to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what we have now is a real definition of what a sustainable investment actually is, and it's written into the European legislation in this in the disclosure regulation. And so what it's saying is that a fund or a product, it's not just funds, I mean, we're quite fund focused, but a financial product, that there are these different, you referred to Article 8 before, Gary, that there are different types of products that we've got. We've got, I'm going to simplify it, light green products, which are Article 8, and dark green products, which are Article 9. And so Article 9, dark green, don't go around saying dark green and light green everywhere, because it's a bit misleading, but dark green, it's products which have an objective to invest in sustainable investments. And sustainable investments is what you see here on the slide. So it's an investment which is linked to an economic activity that contributes to either a specific environmental objective, and it needs to be measured with the KPIs, and you see a few examples. So it could be GHG emissions, and it could be use of raw materials, and or have a specific social objective, which again will be measured. And that could be, I don't know, investment in human capital, or looking at socially disadvantaged communities. I mean, this is not complicated for everybody to understand. So you need to have one or two of those. And also a sustainable investment, for it to be qualified as a sustainable investment, they also need not to be doing any significant harm to EU objectives. That's one point. And then the second point is also to have good governance practices. And so we have an indication of what within those economic activities, within those investments that you might make, what we mean by do no significant harm. And we also have an indication of what we mean by good governance practices. And so that means that a fund which wishes to, or a product which wishes to claim that they are a fully compliant product investing in sustainable investments, then each of their portfolio investments has to comply with these criteria. Then you have the kind of light green products, where they don't have to invest in sustainable investments, which the sustainable investments, they all have to meet these criteria. They can have as objective to simply promote environmental or social practices. So they will stick with having an overall environmental social objective, which will be measured, but then they don't have to report on how they're monitoring do no significant harm. And I think that kind of simplifies a little. But now we do have this definition, which we didn't have before, and I think that was the definition that you had on the previous slide is a nice easy one for everybody to understand. If we're getting into now detailed analysis, which we will have to get into, then this is a little bit more of a complete definition.
Yeah, I think that's helpful from a perspective of understanding. Just a question. So between the light green and the dark green, the light green is an intention by the manager to respect certain elements, but to an extent that it'll build it in where it deems necessary, but not according to any legislative requirements. The dark green, on the other hand, is a firm commitment to adhere to these requirements.
Yeah, yes. I would say if we look at and probably everybody in this call has seen the SRI funds that we have that we're familiar with, that have been created some time ago, or have been around for a while. That the Article 9, so the sustainable investment funds, which need to comply with this this definition. Each investment needs to comply with that. That's how would you say, very dark green, and I think that there are not that many funds around which will be able to claim that they are doing the complete zoom in their investment decisions on all of these elements. There'll need to be a bit of adaptation. Then you have these light green products. Those still have to have quite a firm environmental, social objective, and it needs to be measured, and they need to be able to report on it. So some of the ESG funds that are out there today won't fit into those gaps, and so they won't be able to call themselves an ESG fund anymore. So an asset managers or product managers are going to have to make the decision how they want to tackle that strategically. Do they want to comply, but therefore upskill, up a bit their focus on ESG elements and make sure that they are compliant and carry on calling themselves ESG, or not comply anymore, but they won't be able to say that they're an ESG fund anymore.
An interesting or anecdotal bit of feedback. I mentioned one of my clients being Pieters Bank. Another one is Storebrand in Scandinavia, Norway, and Sweden, who've long been, they could be considered inventors of ESG. They view this movement actually as a positive from the perspective, if nothing else, that having been on the forefront of these developments and having been labeling their products as they have, they're happy to provide whatever more information that they need to do to comply and again, remain on the forefront. Here or there may require some organizational changes, as you'll touch on later, but they certainly seem to be welcoming it. I don't know where the others would stand, but from their perspective, I've noted they see this as an interesting development. And for anyone else, I guess, as you've mentioned here on the slide, the taxonomy should be a helpful guide for those who are involved, and create some clarity, level playing field if you want. So here's a slightly more, let's say, descriptive chart of where and who fits in where. What can we add here to the action plan?
Well, just one point on the taxonomy. I think it needs to be, before I'll talk about this fantastic chart in a minute, but that there's one important point that I think everybody needs to keep in mind, that the idea is not to tell managers what they have to do. The idea is to provide a way of classifying what they do or what they invest in. So managers don't have to change anything at all in the way that they're doing things, apart from, of course, providing certain reporting and KPIs. There's no obligation to consider the taxonomy if you feel it's not relevant. It's just a way of classifying things, and it is also indirectly a way of clarifying and making more transparent those products which are complying with certain minimum requirements. So we're getting rid of a little bit the greenwashers out there who are saying they're doing ESG when they're not really anymore. So there is a way it is contributing to clearing out the supposed ESG funds who aren't really ESG at all. And so maybe if we look at the action plan, so just to summarize, the EU, they pulled together their this action plan, which was issued in March 2018, and looked at the whole, across the whole industry. And this plan was focused on greening the financial sector, if you like, with three underlying or overarching objectives. So reorienting capital flows towards sustainable investment, mainstreaming sustainability risks into risk management, and fostering transparency. And so those are the big objectives that the EU has been focused on, and they came up with these 10 actions, 10 focus areas, if you like, and across a number of those, we already have legislative or guidelines, or, and I think maybe if you go to the next slide, Gary, I think it's the next slide. Yeah. So here you see where we already have a legislative framework, which is giving a framework, and then there is technical advice that's come from the technical expert group, from the European Supervisory Authorities, so ESMA, the EBA, IOPA, and then there is also the delegated acts which are coming, so level 2 legislation, which is in preparation and coming over a certain period in the coming months and year or so to support the legislative framework with additional guidance. So there've been a whole raft of things which are all interlinked, to be honest. So you have we have disclosure requirements for financial products. One of the questions is how is an asset manager going to prepare some of these disclosures and prepare some of these KPIs on the carbon footprint of their portfolio and things like that, if they don't have the data from the corporates that are in their portfolio. So there's also legislation which is saying, corporates, you need to provide this information so that that flows up into the consolidated portfolio statements of sustainability and the reporting that's needed. So that there are, everything is sort of linked together. And it's the same with benchmarks. You have all these all fund products, they're all using benchmarks in some way, either as a way to look at performance, or or index tracking passive funds. And so there have been new benchmarks introduced which are very carbon focused. So there's a Paris aligned and a carbon transition, climate transition benchmark, but then also all the other benchmarks which are supposedly ESG, a bit like the definition that we just talked about before. They need to make a whole load of disclosures to justify how they are ESG and what they're looking at, so that those who are using those benchmarks can use that information to make appropriate disclosures on their fund or product level. So it all feeds in, it all connects somehow.
To your point you made just earlier on the disclosures, a question from Isabel Hock Jensen. Do we already know about sanctions? Does the disclosure regulation provide for sanctions?
The sanctions, the disclosure regulation doesn't provide for sanctions. However, it will be up to each regulator, local regulator, to make sure that this is applied properly. So the CSSF, in our case, is upskilling on the topic of sustainable finance. They are upskilling so that they can look into this whole sustainable finance area. And so that's kind of from our regulated product type area. If you look at corporates, to be quite honest, companies which are not listed, which are supposed to prepare non-financial reporting, but which maybe don't, I'm not sure mechanisms across Europe exist to sanction those companies if they don't do what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, but from our regulated Luxembourg, the CSSF is definitely got this on their radar, and we see that when they're approving new products, sustainability products, they're already looking into this. They're already asking questions about, do you have the expertise? How are you going to deal with this? That sort of thing. So things are changing from that respect.
Exactly. Thanks. So this is a bit of a flow with the steps of where these initiatives are bringing us. I guess to an extent we're here also introducing for the first time the concept of risk management and what the risk management means and so let me ask you a question, Fabio. So from the risk management perspective, and speaking as a management company, obviously, what are your concerns about the current developments? And the first thing that comes to my mind is in terms of providing the reporting, is the data comparable? Is there enough data available, etc.? What are your views on that?
Well, the data is, we have a lot of data, but not yet harmonized data, okay? And that's the big issue at the moment. So in terms of, from a management company point of view, slash IFM, and from a risk management point of view, for us, the most important thing is to start monitoring, of course, a new type of risk, what we call the ESG risk. So same as we are monitoring the liquidity risk, the credit risk, the market risk, we have now a new type of risk that we can call the ESG risk, okay? When a client is integrating an ESG component into the investment strategy, we need first of all to screen the prospectuses and start monitoring the specific aspect, okay? If we take the example of clients investing in good governance companies, or clients which are adding in their prospectuses the fact that they will not invest in assets which are linked to cluster munition activity, okay? We need, of course, to protect the final investor, monitor those restrictions, because since the moment we have those aspects in the fund prospectuses, we need, of course, to monitor and report those type of risk. Typically, we work with exclusion list, but the difficulty at the moment we see is that as we don't have yet harmonized indicators, the most difficult part is to manage the qualitative ESG data. So of course, to be able to cope with that, we are increasing the due diligence processes. We are increasing the communication with our investment managers. And we also need to make sure that the data which at the moment cannot be quantified is independent, so that we can rely on an independency of the data received. Because as you previously said, Garry, this is more and more reported to the financial statement. Auditors are of course asking what type of control we have in place, and we believe that with the regulation going to certain standard, we will more and more be obliged to give information, first of all, to investors via reporting or via key performance indicator, but also to auditors.
Yeah, you mentioned an interesting provider, the audit community. They Big Four, probably more than just the Big Four, are also very active in this. From a personal perspective, I know that I don't know if there's any on the line, by the way, but they've been very helpful in helping the different participants. We've had presentations at board, etc., in terms of expectations in general, but also from an audit perspective. So you make a valid point, I think. That's something that is certainly coming more our way. As you said, there are the disclosures that need to be provided are still to, let's say, be further developed. Jane, what else can we look forward to?
Yeah, so the disclosure regulation, and supported by an ESMA, well, yeah, the ESMA, it's actually issued by the supervisory authorities together, but this consultation paper. So the consultation paper includes a whole load of extra information and templates on how companies should be, companies and products, so it's the management company and the products that they're producing, have to report. So we now have templates that came in April. Templates for some of it, that's out for comment actually for the moment. I think there will be quite a lot of comments on the feasibility and the risk of converting disclosure into a tick box exercise, or just kind of putting the information in when it's not so relevant. So I think there will still be changes, but this consultation paper gives a very good indication, at least of the direction of travel, and is a good resource for guidance on companies that are, or for products and for management companies that are having to start preparing the disclosures, preparing for these disclosures. And like what was said already, there are different different disclosures that need to be made. We need to be looking at for the manager on their web disclosures on the website. So the financial market participants that you see there, and the financial advisor, we need website disclosures, we need prospectus disclosures, we need annual reporting disclosures. So there's a whole raft of different kinds of places that we need to be looking at disclosure. And if you bring together what's written in the disclosure regulation and what's written in this consultation paper, there is a certain element of clarity, at least. I mean, new stuff is always difficult to implement the first time, but there is quite a lot of information which does say you should do this, and this in this bit, and this, and this in this bit. So, I mean, I think there is enough out there for people to work with to try and figure out how to prepare this information. And it's all about being transparent about what's actually really happening, not just writing words for the sake of words, which is what we have seen on some websites before. So again, it's all working towards stopping the greenwashing. And so basically there's nobody in the financial sector that gets away with this, really. It applies to all financial products, and it applies to all market participants, and it applies to all financial advisors. I mean, more or less, there are very few that get away with not being impacted.
In summarizing all the changes that are required from reporting to buying data, etc. There's a question from Manuel Begat that is one of my questions that I repeatedly raise, and that is, first of all, do you have an idea of what costs will be involved? And the second is an obvious question: who's going to end up paying for all this additional cost? Do you have a view on that?
It is additional resources. I mean, clearly, there are additional resources required to collect this information. I mean, it's to a certain extent, it's an opportunity for Luxembourg with our back office role in many of these organisations doing the administration and the reporting is to collect all this, but it's a cost like all new regulations somehow somehow does have a cost. And so doing extra reporting, somebody has to do it, and somebody has to collect the data, and somebody and the fund managers have to buy data if they can't get it from the companies, and so there is a cost. Having said that, I'm going to be maybe a little bit philosophical, Emmanuel, answering your question, and saying, well, maybe it's a small price to pay to save the planet, because somehow if you keep in mind the whole underlying objective of all this is not to annoy us and make us do reporting for nothing. It's to reorient capital flows to make more sustainable investments so that we are doing more climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, and so there's an underlying force underneath, and maybe this is the price to pay. Yes, somebody's got to pay, but this is the price to pay for the long-term benefit that we hope we can get from reorienting all our investments into less harmful activities.
I've heard, Jane, and you may as well, I've heard a new phrase pop up, obviously a while back, but and it relates also to the discussion about the millennia and how they look at investing, etc. And the phrase is, so it used to be only about financial performance, but what is creeping into the discussion now is, let's call it impact performance. And in pure numbers, I think more people are, if not happy, certainly will accept a reduction in the financial performance, provided that they see that come back in, let's say, the impact performance. Doing the right thing while investing and making a financial performance. So I think that partially might also answer the question. Moving along, so again, we talked about the risks and the challenges, Fabio, that we see in this environment. I guess you've answered part of the question here, but how clear are you at this stage on what those sustainability risks are in a manageable perspective?
Well, we can, so as we already said, ESG risks are impacting different aspects of the life of a fund. If we can take an example of a typical ESG risk, we can think about climate change on the valuation of an asset. Mm-hmm. So if we take the example of real estate industry, or also companies which are investing in tourism, we need to think now that climate change might have, well, already has an impact on the valuation of those assets. So this is a typical example of how we see the ESG risk coming into force and impacting risk which are already existing, such as the valuation risk. So this, for me as risk manager, is a typical risk we are taking into consideration.
Thanks. That's yeah. It's not easy, and a lot needs to be still digested. But we're moving in the right direction, I think. In terms of direction, there's sort of different steps, as Jane showed us in one of the previous slides. This is kind of with a slightly forward-looking view what will come to us. I think the reporting, so the appliance of the regulation is in March 2021. That would be probably one of the key dates to bear in mind. Following that, there's a few other reporting dates, deadlines that follow, with the last one, so to speak, with the full disclosure in December 22. I recently said, and I'm convinced most of you have said the same, I can't believe we're already almost in July. So we'll be in December 2022 before we know it. We do not have time. We need to help our organization to improve the organizations, to help our risk managers, to help our clients to be on the same line. So these dates may look far away, but I think they'll creep on us before we know it. Just a quick word in slowly winding up, but on the taxonomy, Jane, I think you described the objectives. Anything else to add?
Not necessarily. I think there is one point that comes out of the taxonomy regulation, which I do think is important, which everybody should keep in mind, and which raises a strategic question, is that it's in the taxonomy regulation, but it's talking about disclosure, is that every single product, whatever it is, you're going to have to disclose to what extent you consider sustainability in the product. And if you are selling a financial product where you're not considering sustainability, then you have to write in black and white, in the offering documents, in the annual reporting, on the website, we are not considering sustainability factors in the development of this product, full stop. And so I think that people will feel a little bit uncomfortable with investing in that kind of product if it's written black and white. Well, we don't consider those aspects. So you've got a kind of indirect pressure coming from the fact that people have to say, well, we're not complying, we're not looking at taxonomy, and we're not looking at all of this sustainability. I think that again will push certain product manufacturers to say, well, maybe we should be doing this, let's do it a little bit more, by the mere fact that people just, you have to be more transparent. We're seeking more transparency, and a lot of this is all about transparency. It's not telling fund managers how to do their job, it's just telling fund managers to be transparent about what you're doing. So tell us what percentage of the portfolio is aligned with the taxonomy, and if it's only 10%, well, that's okay. But that then the investors can make their informed decision with that information.
I think Emmanuel agrees with you also from the extent when you said there's more to do. There's in the periphery of all this and the regulation, etc. There's more to do almost on a personal level in terms of making the impact. So I think that's a valid comment you make. So I think you called them the four gaps, Jane. So getting the organization ready, managing the conflicts of interest, adopting the taxonomy, and the risk management. If I'm not mistaken, those were the four gaps that you refer to.
Yeah, I mean that there are a number of steps that we need to go through in getting our organizations ready, and so you have first of all this switch of mindset that we need to embrace the topic and decide strategically whether we, or to what extent we want to get onto this sustainability topic more or less. So you get this mindset, and then you have this idea of data, and we've talked a little bit about the challenges around data and getting available data, etc. So then there is still the data challenge of being able to get all the data you need to make informed decisions. And then we've got the competency gap somehow, and it's it's clearly important that we all upskill, and this is not the only webinar that's happened in the last few weeks, and it won't be the only one this year, the last one this year either, on this topic of sustainable finance, because everybody needs to get to grips with it and understand. And okay, some of us started before others, but basically at some stage, I think anybody with a role, a responsibility, formal or informal, in any of our operational departments, or whether it be on the board all the way down to, you know, whether it's the portfolio management, risk management, all of these functions, everybody's going to have a minimum, or a moderate level of understanding of all of these concepts. Same for the distributors as well. I mean, we've now got MiFID. MiFID is also going to be changed, and IDD, the Insurance Distribution Directive as well, where there's going to be an obligation now in the draft, drafts that were issued 2 weeks ago. There is an obligation, or there will be an obligation, to ask every single client what their sustainability preferences are, at the same time as asking them what's their risk return profile, and an obligation to document that and offer them the right products. So we get another force to give the investor a voice on how important sustainability is for them. And I think that all investors, most investors, when they're asked, do you have any particular sustainability preferences, they're not going to say, no, I don't care, ignore that topic. They're going to say, provided there's no negative impact on my financial performance, then yes, of course I want to invest in the right products. And there's a lot of evidence to prove now that you don't actually lose financial return by investing in sustainable products. That the results are the same, even if you take into account the extra costs that Emmanuel referred to, that we are going to have on these products, sustainable products in particular.
We're slowly running out of time, so maybe a last question for you, Fabio, on the risk management. I think you've described pretty well the challenges, etc. So from a management company perspective, and for me speaking as an independent director, boards frequently look to their management companies, obviously, for assistance. There's a lot that actually has to start at the level of the board. Do you foresee, do you provide, let's say, assistance in that dialogue between the management company, the asset manager, and the boards of funds?
Yes, of course, the management company will of course provide in the board reports, to the attention of each board, indicators around the ESG data, because if maybe I come one step back, and an important point is the disclosure regulation, which the EU taxonomy is addressing. So more and more investors are interested to understand the impact of their investment on the society, okay? And they're also, of course, interested to understand the integration of the ESG criteria in the performance of the funds. So this is something a management company or an IFM will need to report, of course, to the attention of the board, because our first role is, of course, to protect the final investors and also to inform the board. So yes, it will be the main challenge. ESG is also driven by investors, and we see, of course, the ultimate goal will be, so one, to protect the investor, and two, to inform investors about the impact of ESG on the society, but also on the performance of the funds where they invest.
Well, I know MDO is well positioned in terms of liaising with boards and other service providers. You're linked all around, but it's good to know there's a partner out there that can help that discussion and help boards also in discussion and provide input from different levels, not in the last place, risk management and its reporting. So thanks for that. So kind of winding down, we started off with the question, I guess, if ESG is a niche or necessity. I think we saw the journey and development of ESG from sustainability, from impact to a slightly more defined ESG environment. It is certainly embraced by a lot of parties, has been in the past, and more now. And when I say parties, I don't limit that to asset managers or related parties, but really from top to bottom, from left to right, everybody seems to be embracing this, which is, I think, at the end of the day, is a good thing, and we should help. We should help this wherever we can. I think, from my perspective, it's therefore maybe not even certainly not a niche. Maybe not even a necessity. It is just something that we probably consider the right thing to do. And if we need to put that into reports and we need to put that into regulation, so be it. And I think in that sense, it's a good thing where we are. Bearing in mind that we're only on one particular point in that journey, and there's a lot more that'll come our way and a lot more developments and changes that we'll be able to make. So with that kind of winding down, let me just, for our participants, thank you for your time. I see no further open questions. Just a quick roundup. Fabio, any last minute kind of thoughts from your end?
Well, it's ESG. It's a long journey. I'm part of the MDO ESG working group. We are really working closely with, internally, and we are of course following the evolution of the regulation to be ready, assisting our clients, and we are very excited about this.
Good to hear. Jane, thanks for your contribution. It's been absolutely wonderful, and for allowing us to pick your brains. Any last minute thoughts from you?
Yeah, I just think that we should see this as see the necessity as an opportunity. So we have to do this now because we weren't doing it enough before. There's legislation which is making us do it. Sometimes you need legislation to accelerate certain actions from communities, countries, sectors. But we should see the necessity as an opportunity and build that in to Luxembourg. So we should work hard to distinguish Luxembourg as the centre which has got a grasp on this and who can therefore effectively do all your fund reporting and support the managers in collecting the data and crunching it and doing whatever necessary. So I think we need to see it as an opportunity and look for those opportunities from a Luxembourg perspective. I mean, I guess most people who are on most participants are actually based in Luxembourg, so there are opportunities for our financial sector here.
That's an excellent positive thought to end on, Jane. Thanks for that. And in terms of participants, I was told that we have 60 plus participants. So a very big thank you to all of our participants for your patience and your interest. And I would say on behalf of my colleagues and probably on behalf of everybody else, thanks for helping to make this part of what we do. And we look forward to another occasion to discuss things with you. So for now, thank you very much and stay safe, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Garry. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.
Ciao, bye-bye.